A single red blood cell, a flattened disc about 7.5 micrometers across and 2 micrometers thick, roughly the width of a strand of spider silk, is about to do something that should be impossible. It is approaching a capillary, the narrowest vessel in your entire circulatory system, a tube only 3 to 4 micrometers wide. The cell is wider than the door it must pass through, and it will pass through anyway. It folds itself. It bends into the shape of a parachute, deforming its own membrane, squeezing its edges inward, and it slips through a gap roughly half its own diameter, then springs back to a disc on the other side. It does this not once but billions of times. That single cell will make a complete circuit of your body, heart to lungs to arteries to capillaries to veins and back, in approximately 60 seconds. Over its 1-2-0-day lifespan, it will travel something on the order of 400 kilometers through your vessels, folding and unfolding through the narrow passages hundreds of thousands of times before it wears out, and your spleen dismantles it. You have roughly 25 trillion of these cells in circulation at this moment. They are not floating in water. They are suspended in plasma, and the mixture of cells and plasma together is one of the strangest fluids in the known universe. We call it blood, and we treat it as familiar. The physics says it is anything but. Here is the first surprising fact. Blood is not a simple liquid. Water is a simple liquid. Pour water through a wide pipe or a narrow pipe, push it fast or push it slow, and its resistance to flow, its viscosity, stays the same. Physicists call water a Newtonian fluid because it obeys the simple rules Isaac Newton laid out for how fluids resist motion. Blood does not obey those rules. Blood is a non-Newtonian fluid, and specifically it is shear-thinning, which means the harder you push it, the more easily it flows. Push it slowly, and it thickens. The cells clump and stack and drag against one another. Push it quickly, and it thins. The cells line up, slide into the center of the stream, and the whole fluid becomes more liquid. The same blood, in the same vessel, can be thick or thin, depending entirely on how fast it is moving. Hold that fact, because it is the hinge on which this entire story turns. Now, what is viscosity, really? It is the internal friction of a fluid, the resistance of one layer of liquid sliding past another. Honey has high viscosity. Water has low viscosity. Blood sits somewhere in between, roughly 3 to 4 times more viscous than water under normal flow. But that number is not fixed. It depends on what blood is made of. The single most important variable is the hematocrit, the percentage of your blood volume occupied by red blood cells. In a typical healthy adult, the hematocrit runs around 40 to 45%. Just under half of your blood by volume is cells. The rest is plasma, which is about 92% water-carrying proteins, salts, sugars, and clotting factors. Raise the hematocrit, pack more cells into the same volume of plasma, and viscosity climbs steeply. It does not climb in a straight line. It climbs as a curve that bends sharply upward. A small increase in the proportion of cells produces a disproportionately large increase in thickness. Take the hematocrit from 45 to 50%, a change that sounds minor, and the viscosity can rise by a third or more. The blood becomes measurably harder to push, and there is a man whose name is attached to exactly this problem. Jean-Léonard Marie Poiseuille, a French physician and physicist working in the 1840s, wanted to understand how fluids move through narrow tubes, and the fluid he cared about was blood. He was a doctor first. He worked out a relationship, now called Poiseuille's law, that describes the flow of a fluid through a cylindrical vessel, and buried in that law is a term that should stop you cold. The flow rate depends on the radius of the vessel raised to the fourth power. The fourth power. If you halve the radius of a blood vessel, you do not halve the flow, you reduce it to 1/16. A small narrowing of a vessel produces an enormous drop in flow, and flow appears in the equation alongside viscosity, in the denominator. Raise the viscosity, and flow drops in direct proportion. So your circulation faces 2 independent levers that can choke it. The width of the vessel, which matters to the fourth power, and the thickness of the fluid, which matters directly. Now imagine a situation where both levers move in the wrong direction at the same time. The vessels narrow, and the blood thickens, simultaneously, driven by a single external cause, That is not a hypothetical. That is what winter does to your body, and we will get to exactly how in a moment. But first, understand what the heart is dealing with. Your heart is a pump, and like any pump, the work it must do depends on the resistance it pushes against. Thicker blood means higher resistance. Higher resistance means the heart must generate more pressure to move the same volume. More pressure means more work, more oxygen demand, more strain on the muscle of the heart wall itself, the myocardium, which is fed by its own narrow vessels, the coronary arteries. When blood thickens, the heart that must pump it is also the organ most endangered by the thickening, because its own supply lines are exactly the kind of narrow, vulnerable vessels where thick, slow-moving blood causes the most trouble. There is one more property of this strange fluid you need to hold on to. When blood moves slowly, red cells tend to stick together, edge to edge, forming stacks that look like rolls of coins. Physiologists call this rouleau formation. These stacks increase viscosity further. They are fragile. They break apart when flow speeds up. But in slow-moving blood they persist, and they make slow blood even thicker, which makes it move even more slowly, a feedback loop pulling in the wrong direction. Slow blood begets thick blood begets slower blood. Speed breaks the loop. Stillness deepens it. Keep that loop in mind, because it is the engine underneath everything that follows. The blood in your vessels right now is not a passive liquid being pushed around. It is a living suspension whose very thickness depends on how much it moves. And what you are about to see is how the season outside your window reaches into that suspension and changes it. In 1984, a physiologist named William Keating published a study in the British Medical Journal that should have changed how everyone thinks about winter. Keating spent his career at the London Hospital Medical College studying what cold does to the human body, and he was particularly interested in a puzzle that had bothered epidemiologists for decades. Why do more people die in winter? Not from hypothermia, not from freezing to death. That explains only a tiny fraction. The deaths that spike in winter are heart attacks and strokes. Cardiovascular deaths climb every winter across the entire temperate world, a pattern so consistent it appears in mortality data, from England to Russia to the northern United States, and the spike is not small. In some populations, cardiovascular mortality runs 20 to 30% higher in the coldest months than in the warmest. Keating wanted to know the mechanism, and what he found connects directly to the strange fluid we just described. He took healthy volunteers and exposed them to mild cold, the kind you would feel sitting in an underheated room, not extreme, just a few degrees of chill on the skin, and he measured their blood. Within hours the blood had changed. The red cell count rose. The hematocrit climbed. The plasma concentration of fibrinogen, the clotting protein, increased. The platelet count went up. The blood, by every measure he took, had become thicker and more prone to clotting. Mild cold, the temperature of an ordinary winter day, was enough to do it. Now follow the physics of how this happens, because it is a chain of perfectly sensible responses that combine into something dangerous. The chain begins at your skin. When cold air touches your skin, temperature sensors fire, and your nervous system responds with a reflex as old as warm-blooded life itself: vasoconstriction. The tiny muscles wrapped around the arteries near your skin contract, squeezing those vessels narrower, shunting blood away from the cold surface and toward the warm core where your vital organs live. This is your body protecting its temperature. It works. Your core stays warm while your fingers and nose go cold. But look at what it does to the plumbing. Constrict the peripheral vessels, and you have just reduced the total volume of the container that holds your blood. The same amount of blood is now packed into a smaller network of vessels. Pressure rises. This is why blood pressure runs measurably higher in winter than in summer, a difference of several millimeters of mercury on average across whole populations. And remember Poiseuille and his fourth power. Narrowing those vessels does not gently raise resistance. It raises it steeply. The heart now pushes against a tighter, higher pressure system. That is the first lever moving in the wrong direction, the vessels themselves. Now the second lever, the one almost nobody knows about. It is called cold diuresis, and it is one of the strangest tricks your body plays on itself. When vasoconstriction pushes blood inward from your skin toward your core, your central blood volume rises. The big vessels around your heart and in your chest suddenly feel fuller. Pressure sensors in those vessels, called baroreceptors, detect this rise and report it to your brain and kidneys with a simple message. There is too much fluid in the central circulation. Reduce the volume. Your kidneys obey. They begin dumping water into your urine to bring the central volume back down. This is why you need to urinate more in the cold, a sensation anyone who has stood outside on a freezing day knows well. Your body is shedding water. But here is the trap. The fullness in your central vessels was an illusion created by constriction, not by an actual excess of fluid. You did not have too much water. You had the same water squeezed into a smaller space. And now your kidneys have flushed out real fluid in response to a false alarm. The water leaves in your urine, but the cells and proteins stay behind. You have just lost plasma, the watery part of your blood, while keeping all your red cells. Run that through the definition of hematocrit. Hematocrit is the percentage of blood volume that is cells. Remove plasma, keep the cells, and that percentage rises automatically. You have concentrated your own blood. The cells are now packed more densely into less fluid. Viscosity climbs the steep part of that curve we described, and nobody felt it happen because the dehydration of winter is invisible. In summer you sweat, you feel thirsty, you drink. In winter the air is dry, the cold suppresses the sensation of thirst, you sweat without noticing it because the moisture evaporates instantly, and your kidneys are quietly draining you through cold diuresis. People drink less water in winter precisely when their blood is thickening and needs it most. The thirst signal goes quiet at the exact moment the fluid is most needed. Now stack the changes Keating measured on top of this concentration effect. Fibrinogen rises in the cold. Fibrinogen is the protein that, when activated, weaves the mesh that holds a blood clot together. More fibrinogen means blood that clots more readily and, separately, blood that is thicker. Because fibrinogen molecules are large and sticky and they raise plasma viscosity on their own. They also promote rouleau, the coin-stack clumping of red cells we talked about, because fibrinogen bridges the cells together. So fibrinogen does double damage. It thickens the plasma and it glues the cells into stacks. Platelets rise too, and cold appears to make platelets stickier, more likely to activate and aggregate. Put the whole chain together and look at what winter has built. The vessels are constricted, narrower, higher in resistance by the fourth power. The plasma volume is reduced by cold diuresis, raising the hematocrit and the viscosity. The fibrinogen is elevated, thickening the plasma further and stacking the cells. The platelets are more numerous and more reactive. Every single one of these changes pushes in the same direction, toward thicker, slower, more clot-prone blood moving through narrower, higher pressure vessels. This is not a coincidence of separate effects. It is one cause, cold, triggering a coordinated response that happens to be perfectly designed to cause a heart attack. Because consider where the danger lands. The coronary arteries that feed the heart muscle are narrow vessels, and many people past middle age already have them partly narrowed by atherosclerotic plaque, fatty deposits in the vessel wall. A vessel, already narrowed by plaque, now constricted further by cold, now carrying blood that is thicker and slower and richer in clotting factors. If a plaque in such a vessel cracks, and cold-stressed vessels with high pressure inside them are more likely to crack, the thickened, platelet-rich, fibrinogen-loaded blood that meets that crack will clot fast and clot hard. The clot seals the artery. The heart muscle downstream loses its blood supply. That is a heart attack, and the physics of winter has loaded every variable toward making it happen. The same logic applies in the brain, where a clot or a burst vessel becomes a stroke. Keating took this further. He found that much of the excess winter mortality was not happening to people exposed to severe cold. It was happening to people exposed to mild cold, indoors and outdoors, who were not dressed warmly enough and did not realize the danger because they never felt truly cold. The body's blood-thickening response does not require a blizzard. It requires only enough chill to trigger vasoconstriction, and that threshold is low. A cool room, a thin coat, a draft, a morning that is merely brisk, the response runs anyway. And the people most vulnerable are the old, whose vessels are already narrowed, whose blood pressure is already high, whose thirst sensation is already blunted, and whose hearts have the least reserve to handle the added strain. There is a particular time of day when all of this peaks, and it is worth knowing. Heart attacks cluster in the morning hours, in the first few hours after waking. In the morning, your blood is at its most concentrated, you have gone all night without drinking, you have lost water through breathing and through the kidneys, your blood pressure surges as you rise, and your platelets are at their most reactive. Add winter cold to a winter morning, and you have assembled the single most dangerous combination of fluid physics the human body routinely produces. A cold winter morning, blood thick from overnight dehydration and cold diuresis, vessels constricted, pressure surging, clotting factors high. This is why the data shows what it shows. So now you understand the trap winter sets. It thickens your blood through a chain of responses that each made sense in isolation and combine into something hazardous. The vessels narrow, the plasma drains, the clotting factors rise, and the thirst that would prompt you to refill the fluid goes silent. The question that follows is the one that matters most. If stillness and cold conspire to thicken the blood, what breaks the trap? The answer is not a drug. The answer is the oldest one there is: movement. And the way movement reaches into this thick, slow, clumping fluid and transforms it is a piece of physics as elegant as the trap itself. Recall the single most important property of blood, the one I asked you to hold on to. Blood is shear thinning. The harder you push it, the more easily it flows. This is not a metaphor, and it is not a minor effect. It is the central physical fact that movement exploits, and to understand it you need to understand a word that physicists use constantly and almost nobody else has heard: shear. Shear is what happens when adjacent layers of a fluid slide past each other at different speeds. Picture blood flowing through a vessel. The layer of fluid right against the vessel wall moves slowly, dragged back by friction with the wall. The fluid in the center of the vessel moves fastest, unobstructed. Between the slow edge and the fast center, every layer slides past its neighbor at a slightly different speed. That sliding, that difference in velocity between adjacent layers, is shear. And the rate at which the layers slide past one another is called the shear rate. Here is what shear does to blood. When the shear rate is high, when the fluid is moving fast and the layers are sliding briskly past one another, the red blood cells respond in two ways. First, they stop clumping. The rouleau stacks, those fragile rolls of coins, get torn apart by the sliding motion. The cells separate. Second, the individual cells deform. Remember, a red blood cell is not a rigid sphere. It is a flexible disc, and under shear it stretches into an elongated, streamlined shape and aligns itself with the direction of flow. Picture a school of fish turning to face the current, every body lined up, offering the least resistance. Stacked, clumped, randomly tumbling cells make a thick fluid. Separated, elongated, aligned cells make a thin one. High shear produces the second condition. So when blood moves fast, it physically reorganizes itself into a thinner, more streamlined fluid. The faster it moves, the thinner it gets. And the thinner it gets, the more easily it moves. This is the opposite of the rouleau feedback loop from slow blood. This is the loop running in the right direction. Speed begets thinness, begets more speed. Now you can see why stillness is so dangerous, and why motion is the antidote written into the physics of the fluid itself. In still or slow-moving blood, the shear rate is low. The cells clump into rouleau, the blood thickens. In fast-moving blood, the shear rate is high. The cells separate and align. The blood thins. Your blood is not a fixed substance with a fixed thickness. Its thickness is set, moment to moment, by how fast it is moving, and how fast it is moving depends substantially on whether you are moving. But movement does something even more important than thinning the fluid, and it solves a mechanical problem that the heart alone cannot solve. Consider the journey of blood through your body. Your heart pumps it out through the arteries with great force, and that pressure carries it down to your tissues, all the way to your feet, but then it has to come back, and coming back is the hard part. The blood in the veins of your legs has to travel upward, against gravity, back to the heart. By the time blood reaches your veins, most of the pressure the heart gave it has been spent pushing through the narrow capillaries. Venous blood is under low pressure, moving slowly, and in your legs it must climb. How? The heart is behind it, not above it. There is not enough pressure left to push it up. Your body solves this with one of the most underappreciated pieces of engineering in human physiology, the skeletal muscle pump. The deep veins of your legs run directly through the bellies of your large muscles, the calf muscles in particular. When you contract those muscles, when you take a step, when you rise on your toes, when you simply tense your calf, the muscle bulges and squeezes the veins running through it. That squeeze compresses the veins and drives the blood inside them upward. And here is the elegant part. Your veins contain one-way valves, small flaps spaced along their length, that open to let blood flow toward the heart and snap shut to prevent it flowing back down. So every time a muscle contracts and squeezes a vein, blood is pushed upward through the open valve above. When the muscle relaxes, the valve below opens, the valve above closes, and the segment refills from below, ready to be pushed up on the next contraction. Step by step, contraction by contraction, your leg muscles pump venous blood back up to your heart against gravity. The calf muscles do this so effectively that physiologists call the calf the second heart. It is a genuine pump, driven not by the cardiac muscle, but by the act of walking. Every step you take is a stroke of that second heart. Now think about what happens when you stop. When you sit still for hours, when you lie in bed, when you stand motionless, the muscle pump stops pumping. The second heart goes quiet. Venous blood in your legs no longer gets squeezed upward. It pools. It sits in the low-pressure veins of your legs, slow and still. And slow, still blood, as we now know in detail, is thick blood, clumping blood, clotting-prone blood. This is the physics behind a danger you may have heard about under the name economy class syndrome, the blood clots that form in the deep veins of the legs during long flights or long periods of immobility. The medical name is deep vein thrombosis. The cause is straightforward. Stillness shuts down the muscle pump, venous blood stagnates in the legs, the low shear rate lets the cells clump and the clotting factors concentrate, and a clot forms in the still pool. If that clot breaks loose and travels to the lungs, it becomes a pulmonary embolism, which can be fatal. The entire chain begins with one thing: not moving. The muscle pump is the difference between blood that circulates and blood that stagnates, and the muscle pump runs only when you move. There is a researcher whose work illuminates the other side of this, the active side. The science of how movement shapes circulation owes a great deal to the study of what happens inside vessels when blood flows briskly across their inner surface. And that brings us to the most important surface in your entire cardiovascular system, a surface you have probably never thought about. The inner lining of every blood vessel in your body, from the largest artery to the smallest capillary, is coated with a single layer of cells called the endothelium. If you took all the endothelial cells in an adult body and laid them flat, they would cover something on the order of a tennis court. For most of medical history, the endothelium was thought to be inert, just a smooth lining, a sort of biological wallpaper that kept the blood inside the tube. That understanding was completely wrong, and overturning it won a Nobel Prize, which is where Chapter 4 begins. But you need to see the mechanical setup first, because it is the bridge. When blood flows across the endothelium, it exerts a force on that surface. Not the pressure pushing outward against the vessel wall, that is different. This is the dragging force of the fluid sliding along the surface in the direction of flow, the frictional pull of moving blood against the cells lining the vessel. Physicists call it wall shear stress, and it is the same shear concept from before, now applied to the boundary between the fluid and the wall. Fast-moving blood exerts high shear stress on the endothelium. Slow-moving blood exerts low shear stress. And here is the revelation that changed cardiovascular medicine. The endothelium can feel that shear stress. The endothelial cells are not passive. They are equipped with mechanical sensors, structures on their surface, and within their membranes that detect the dragging force of the blood flowing over them and convert that mechanical signal into a chemical response. The endothelium is a sensory organ. It reads the speed of your blood as a force on its surface, and it responds by releasing chemicals that change the behavior of the entire vessel. When blood flows fast and shear stress is high, the endothelium responds one way, a healthy way. When blood flows slow and shear stress is low, it responds another way, and that way, over time, is where disease begins. So, movement does three distinct things to your blood, and we have now seen the mechanics of two of them. It raises the shear rate within the fluid, tearing apart the rouleau stacks and aligning the cells so the blood physically thins. It drives the skeletal muscle pump, squeezing venous blood back to the heart and preventing the stagnation where clots form. And it raises the wall shear stress on the endothelium, sending a mechanical signal to the tennis court of cells lining your vessels, a signal that triggers a chemical cascade we have not yet opened. That third effect, the chemistry the moving blood awakens in the vessel wall, is where movement stops being merely mechanical and starts rewriting the blood at the molecular level. It is where a moving body literally manufactures the molecule that keeps its own vessels open. And it begins with a discovery about a gas that, until the 1980s, nobody imagined the body could possibly use. In 1980, a pharmacologist named Robert Furchgott at the State University of New York was studying how blood vessels relax. He was working with strips of rabbit artery, and he was getting results that made no sense. A chemical called acetylcholine was known to relax blood vessels, to make them dilate. But in Furchgott's experiments, sometimes it worked and sometimes it did nothing, and he could not figure out why. Then he realized the variable he had been ignoring. In the experiments where acetylcholine relaxed the vessel, the delicate inner lining, the endothelium, was intact. In the experiments where it did nothing, the endothelium had been accidentally damaged or rubbed away during preparation. The lining he and everyone else had treated as inert wallpaper was doing something essential. The endothelium was releasing a substance that told the vessel to relax. Furchgott did not know what the substance was. He called it endothelium-derived relaxing factor, EDRF, a placeholder name for a mystery molecule. The hunt for its identity took the rest of the decade, and the answer, when it came, was astonishing. The molecule was nitric oxide, a gas. A simple molecule of one nitrogen atom and one oxygen atom, the same compound found in smog and car exhaust, was being manufactured by the lining of your blood vessels and used as a signal to keep them open. The idea that the body would use a gas as a messenger was so unexpected that the discovery reshaped physiology. In 1998, Furchgott, along with Louis Ignarro and Farid Murad, won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for it. Now connect this to the shear stress from the previous chapter, because this is where the two threads braid together. The endothelial cells feel the drag of blood flowing across them. And one of the primary things they do in response to that shear stress is manufacture nitric oxide. The faster the blood flows, the higher the shear stress, the more nitric oxide the endothelium produces. The enzyme responsible is called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, ENOS, and it is switched on by the mechanical force of flowing blood. Once produced, the nitric oxide diffuses from the endothelium into the smooth muscle cells wrapped around the vessel, and it tells those muscles to relax. The vessel dilates, it opens wider, and a wider vessel, by Poiseuille's fourth power law, carries dramatically more blood with far less resistance. Follow the loop this creates, because it is the exact opposite of winter's vicious cycle, and it is just as self-reinforcing. You move. Your blood flows faster. Faster flow means higher shear stress on the endothelium. Higher shear stress means more nitric oxide. More nitric oxide means the vessels dilate. Dilated vessels mean lower resistance and better flow. And better flow sustains the shear stress that keeps the nitric oxide coming. Movement, through the simple physics of fluid drag on a living surface, switches on the body's own system for opening its vessels. This is not a temporary effect that vanishes the moment you sit down either. People who move regularly, whose endothelium is exposed to high shear stress day after day, develop endothelium that produces more nitric oxide and produces it more readily. The vessels become more responsive, more able to dilate on demand. Conversely, an endothelium that rarely feels brisk flow, the endothelium of a sedentary body, becomes sluggish in its nitric oxide production. This is called endothelial dysfunction, and it is one of the earliest measurable steps on the road to cardiovascular disease, appearing in the vessels long before any blockage is visible. The endothelium that is never asked to feel fast blood forgets how to keep its vessel open, Now hold the winter picture against this. In winter, cold constricts your vessels. Nitric oxide dilates them. These two forces are in direct opposition, pushing on the same vessel walls in opposite directions. The cold says close. The nitric oxide says open. And whether your vessels stay dangerously narrowed or comfortably open in winter depends in part on which signal wins. A sedentary winter body, low on nitric oxide, has little to counter the cold's command to constrict. A moving winter body, flooding its endothelium with shear stress and nitric oxide, fights the constriction directly, with the body's own chemistry. Movement does not just warm you. It chemically opposes the very mechanism by which cold endangers you. But nitric oxide is only the first of the molecular gifts that movement delivers. There is a second system, and it goes after the most dangerous feature of winter blood directly, the clotting. Recall that winter blood is loaded with fibrinogen and reactive platelets, primed to form clots. Your body has a counter system, a built-in mechanism for dissolving clots before they grow dangerous. It is called the fibrinolytic system, fibrinolysis, meaning the breaking down of fibrin, the protein mesh that holds a clot together. The key molecule in this system is called tissue plasminogen activator, abbreviated TPA. When TPA is released into the blood, it activates an enzyme called plasmin, and plasmin acts like a pair of molecular scissors, cutting the fibrin mesh apart and dissolving the clot. TPA is so central to this process that a manufactured version of it is one of the emergency drugs given to people in the middle of a stroke or heart attack, injected to dissolve the clot that is killing them. Your body makes its own, and here is what matters. The endothelium releases TPA, and its release is stimulated by, among other things, exercise and increased blood flow. When you move, you raise the level of clot-dissolving activity in your blood. The same brisk circulation that thins the fluid through shear, that drives the muscle pump, that switches on nitric oxide, also tilts the balance of your clotting system toward dissolving clots rather than forming them. Movement enhances fibrinolysis. Stillness lets it idle. So picture the two states side by side, the still, cold winter body. Fibrinogen high, platelets reactive, clotting favored, fibrinolysis quiet, blood thick and slow, vessels constricted, nitric oxide low. Every variable set toward forming a clot and keeping it. Now the moving body. Shear high, cells separated and aligned, muscle pump running, nitric oxide flowing, vessels dilated, TPA released, fibrinolysis active, clots dissolve before they grow. Every variable set toward keeping the blood liquid and the vessels open. Same body, same blood, the difference is motion. There is one more effect of movement on the blood, and it is perhaps the most direct answer of all to the winter thickening, because it attacks the hematocrit problem at its root. Remember that winter raises your hematocrit by stripping plasma out of your blood through cold diuresis and invisible dehydration, concentrating the cells, thickening the fluid. Regular physical activity does the reverse. It expands your plasma volume. When you exercise regularly, your body adapts by increasing the amount of plasma in your circulation, sometimes by 10% or more, within days to weeks of beginning consistent activity. The body senses the demands of repeated exertion and responds by adding fluid to the blood. More plasma, with the same number of red cells, means a lower hematocrit. The cells are now suspended in more fluid, more spread out, less crowded. The blood is, by direct measurement, thinner. This is sometimes noticed in athletes and given an alarming name, sports anemia, but it is not anemia in any harmful sense. It is dilution. The athlete has not lost red cells. The athlete has gained plasma, and the result is blood that flows more easily, delivers oxygen more efficiently, and asks less of the heart. The moving body literally waters down its own blood, the precise opposite of what winter's cold diuresis does. So now, lay out the complete set of tools that movement brings to the thick, slow, dangerous blood of a cold season. It raises the shear rate inside the fluid, tearing apart the rouleau stacks and aligning the cells so the blood physically thins. It runs the skeletal muscle pump, squeezing venous blood back to the heart and clearing the stagnant pools where clots breed. It raises wall shear stress on the endothelium, switching on nitric oxide production, dilating the vessels, and directly opposing the cold's command to constrict. It stimulates the release of TPA, activating the system that dissolves clots before they grow. And it expands the plasma volume, diluting the blood and lowering the hematocrit, undoing the concentration that cold diuresis imposed. 5 mechanisms: mechanical, chemical, and adaptive, all triggered by the same simple act: moving your body. Not one of these requires a prescription. Not one requires a machine or a clinic. They are built into your physiology, waiting for the signal that you are in motion. And the signal is the motion itself. Your grandmother telling you to get up, to keep moving, to not sit still all winter, was not nagging. She was, without knowing the name of a single one of these molecules, prescribing nitric oxide release, muscle pump activation, shear thinning, enhanced fibrinolysis, and plasma volume expansion. She just called it keeping busy. The last thing to understand is what happens when these two stories, the thickening of winter and the thinning of movement, meet in a single human life on a single cold morning, because that is where the physics stops being abstract and becomes the most practical decision you will make all season. Picture a specific morning. It is January. The temperature outside is just above freezing, nothing dramatic, nothing that would make the news. A person wakes somewhere north of that 35th parallel in a house kept cool overnight to save on heating. They have slept 7 or 8 hours, and during every one of those hours they were breathing out water vapor, losing fluid through their skin, and their kidneys were quietly working. They have not had a sip of water since the evening before. Their blood, at this moment, is at its most concentrated point in the entire 24-hour cycle. The plasma is down. The hematocrit is up. The blood is thick. Now the cool air of the bedroom touches their skin as they push back the blankets, and the oldest reflex fires. Vasoconstriction. The peripheral vessels clamp down. Blood pressure climbs. The central circulation feels full. The baroreceptors misread the fullness as excess fluid, and the kidneys, already primed to shed water, prepare to drain a little more. The cold has begun thickening blood that overnight dehydration already thickened, and then this person sits down. They sit with coffee, they sit at a screen, they sit because it is cold and dark and moving feels like the last thing the body wants. The skeletal muscle pump stays silent. Venous blood settles into the legs and pools. The shear rate in the vessels drops toward its minimum. The red cells, unhurried, begin to stack into rouleaux. The slow blood thickens further, which slows it further, which thickens it further, the vicious loop turning quietly all morning. The endothelium, feeling no brisk flow across its surface, releases little nitric oxide, so nothing pushes back against the cold's command to constrict. The fibrinolytic system idles, TPA low, while the winter-elevated fibrinogen and the reactive platelets sit ready in a fluid that is barely moving. Every single variable we have traced across 4 chapters is now stacked on the dangerous side of the ledger, and they are all stacked at the same time, in the same body, on the same cold and motionless morning. This is the morning the mortality statistics are made of. This is the configuration behind the winter spike Keating spent his career explaining. It is not one cause. It is the convergence of all of them, and the thing that holds them in convergence is stillness. Now run the same morning again, and change one variable. The same person, the same cold house, the same concentrated overnight blood. But this time, within the first hour of waking, they drink a full glass of water and they move. Not a marathon. A walk. 15, 20 minutes of the body in genuine motion. Watch what unwinds. The water begins refilling the plasma that the night drained, lowering the hematocrit at its source. The walking fires the calf muscles, and the second heart begins to beat, squeezing the pooled venous blood up through its one-way valves, clearing the stagnant lowlands of the legs where clots would otherwise breed. The blood speeds up, and as it speeds, the shear rate climbs, and the rouleau stacks tear apart, the cells separate and elongate and align with the flow, and the fluid physically thins. The faster blood drags harder across the endothelium, and the endothelium answers the way Furchtgott's vessels taught us it would, switching on nitric oxide synthase, releasing the gas that tells the smooth muscle to relax, dilating the vessels directly against the cold's instruction to close them. The same flow stimulates the release of TPA, waking the system that dissolves clots, tilting the balance away from formation and toward dissolution. 5 mechanisms, the same 5, now all firing on the safe side of the ledger, all triggered by the act of standing up and going outside. 2 mornings. Same person, same blood, same January cold. The only difference is whether the body moved. And the gap between those 2 mornings, multiplied across a population and a season, is the difference you can see in the mortality curves of every temperate country on Earth. The physics does not care whether you believe it. The shear thinning happens or it does not. The muscle pump runs or it does not. The nitric oxide flows or it does not. There is no opinion in it. There is only motion or its absence. Now step all the way back and look at the shape of the whole thing. Blood is the strangest fluid in your body, a living suspension whose very thickness is set, moment to moment, by how fast it is moving. Winter reaches into that suspension through a chain of sensible responses: vasoconstriction, cold diuresis, invisible dehydration, rising fibrinogen, and thickens it while narrowing the vessels it must pass through, loading every variable toward the clot. And movement reaches into the same suspension through 5 distinct mechanisms, mechanical and chemical and adaptive, and thins it, speeds it, opens its vessels, dissolves its clots, and dilutes its cells. The trap and the antidote work on the same fluid, in the same body, through the same physics, and they are in direct opposition. The cold says thicken, the motion says thin, the cold says close. The motion says open, the cold says clot. The motion says dissolve. Every winter, in every body, those 2 voices argue. And which one wins is decided largely by a single choice that nobody else can make for you: whether to stay in the chair or get up. Your grandmother never heard of rouleau formation, or wall shear stress, or endothelium-derived relaxing factor. She did not know that the calf is a second heart, or that a gas keeps your arteries open, or that the protein which clots your blood rises when you are cold. She did not know any of the names, but she knew, with the certainty of someone who had watched it happen across a lifetime, that people who keep moving in winter stay well, and people who seize up in the chair in the cold do not. Don't just sit there. Get up and move around, you'll feel better. Bundle up if you're going out. Don't sit in a cold room. Keep your blood moving. Every one of those instructions maps onto a mechanism we can now measure in a laboratory and read off a graph. She was prescribing shear thinning and muscle pump activation and nitric oxide release. She just called it not letting yourself go stiff. She was right. She was always right. The physics only took a few decades to catch up to what she could see from the kitchen window. So tomorrow morning, when it is cold and dark and your blood is at its thickest and every instinct tells you to stay folded in the chair, remember what is actually happening inside you. 25 trillion cells, suspended in a fluid that thins the instant you ask it to move. A second heart in your calves, waiting for the first step. A tennis court of living cells lining your vessels, ready to open them the moment they feel the blood run fast. None of it requires a prescription, none of it requires a clinic. It requires the one thing your grandmother asked of you, and the one thing the winter is trying to talk you out of. Get up, drink the water, go outside, move. The blood that has been thickening all night, in the body that was built to move, will do the rest.